The groans from the audience will be almost loud enough to cover the sound of your teacher sobbing. Hello, welcome to the Heart of the Piano YouTube channel. I'm Bob Rose. I finally got hold of this book. It's called Practiceopedia by Philip Johnston. I've been wanting this book for years. It's out of print, so it's really expensive. So this video is going to be a review of this book, but not only a review, I'm also going to go into the first chapter. Chapters are really small. I'll explain all this in a minute, but basically I'm going to go into some of the good stuff about like how to actually practice effectively. So Philip Johnston's books are absolutely brilliant. He's an Australian music educator, and basically at the moment I had a quick look on Amazon, and right now this book is £150 if you're in the UK. It's £150 if you want it new, or it's and that's with £40 delivery on top of that, so it's almost £200, or it's secondhand for between £80 and £105. If you go on eBay, the cheapest you're going to get it is £50. On Amazon.com, if you're in America, it's you can get it from $80. So it's crazy expensive. It's a book from 2007. And so when about 3 weeks ago, I saw that it was available for £10, I grabbed it, and I've been after this for a long time. And it was completely worth it. This is, I would say, the best book on how to practice that I've come across. And I've gone through a lot of books about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically read out bits of it for you, which I think is fair because it is out of print. What I'm hoping is that this video will be the first in a series of a lot of videos where I tell you kind of in quite a lot of detail what's in here. It's not exactly that there's anything radically new. It's not like, oh, I didn't know that about practicing. But Philip Johnston's strength is to get across very simple, very straightforward concepts that good practicers do in a very engaging, quite witty way, and to lay it out really well, make it visually appealing. And I think it's basically going to stick in people's minds. I've been thinking for a while that I wanted to put videos together on how to practice effectively. And the way that Philip Johnston organizes all these strategies is way better than I could do it, to be honest. He is a very, very good communicator. So first of all, I'm going to do a general review. And then after that, I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of the actual first chapter. If you want to jump straight to the how do I practice, go to this timestamp here, go straight there, and that's where I'm going to get straight to the first thing, which is basically, he calls it beginner. It's not really beginner. I think everyone does this to some degree at all levels, and it's about the addiction that people have to practicing from the beginning of their pieces. But I will have a lot to say on this myself about extra, more nuanced, more advanced stuff to do with that. So I do recommend that you listen through to the end. So it's a very nice book. It's designed, apparently, according to Philip Johnston, it's designed as a coffee table book, and it does have, a really nice layout. It's got lots of illustrations, and it's very nice. It feels nice. It's not like, oh, it's a book. No, you want to pick it up and just kind of dip into it. It's not just for the piano. This is for anyone learning any instrument. So the good thing about this is that it helps you with general strategies. It's not a book to tell you, do this, do that, do this exactly. It's more general guidelines and general strategies that you can use and adapt. So what it's missing is advanced piano-specific strategies for practicing. If you want to know advanced piano practice skills, this is not the book. But, I teach all the way up to advanced diploma level, and I would say that all my students would benefit from the practicing in this book. I think all my students have weaknesses when it comes to practicing. And actually, when I come to the first chapter, which is basically titled Beginners, Curing Your Addiction to the Start of Your Piece. When I was doing my degree, and I'm going to come to the Chopin ballad that this really applies to later on, I was still doing this when I was doing my music degree, playing a Chopin ballad, you know. So yeah, anyway, recommended for absolutely everybody. And no matter how advanced you think you are, unless you're a professional concert pianist, then this is probably not going to be that useful for you. But unless you're a professional concert pianist, you're going to learn stuff from this book. And like I said, I will be explaining quite a lot from here, hopefully, if this is successful, if you guys like this episode. So in the first couple of pages, he basically explains how he hopes you're going to use this book. So he says, you could read it from cover to cover, but who reads encyclopedias like that? There are smarter and much faster ways to find what you need. And so, by the way, it's called Practiceopedia, as in encyclopedia, because like an encyclopedia, you don't read from cover to cover. You kind of dip in, you go, what is it that I want to learn about? I want to learn about this thing. You go alphabetically to that thing. And this is how Philip Johnston has designed this book. So he lays out the different ways that you can use this thing. So he tells you there are basically 6 ways that you can use this book. Well, one of those 6 I'm not sure about, but basically you can start from anywhere. So you don't need to have read the early chapters to understand the later chapters. This has been carefully designed to be and here we have a new word that he's come up with, an open at any page and learn something resource that will help you for many years to come. So you can basically just open it wherever you want. That is quite nice. So also, you can start with a specific problem. He points out that there is an usher on page 16. And so all page 16 basically is, it's an index of having the different problems and challenges that you can have, except here it's like an usher. But so in this section, he tells you which chapters, which the pages to go to for these issues. If you are not wanting to practice, if you are learning new pieces, if you are preparing for a performance, if you're getting your piece up to tempo, up to speed, staying focused, saving time, I think we all want to save time, managing deadlines, and dealing with problem passages. So depending on which of those common problems you have, he'll basically list a whole load of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, roughly about a dozen different chapters for each one of those problems. So that's another way that you can use this book. Or you can preview any chapter, because he basically gives you an index which gives you 2-line summaries of every chapter in the book. So you can quickly jump to the chapters that seem useful. So that's on page 10. So for example, the one that we're looking at today is Beginners, Curing Your Addiction to the Start of Your Piece, except that's not just beginners. Blinkers, shutting out the things you shouldn't be working on. I'll just dip into some ones at random. Designer scales, choosing technical work to support your pieces, another random one. Lesson agenda, setting aside issues to raise at your next lesson. That is a good one, actually. Turnaround time, mastering new pieces in weeks instead of months. Yep, very, very good. Visualizing, the most important practice you'll ever do. So, and yeah, thoroughly agree with almost all of these things. Another one that we can, another strategy we can use cross-references. So every single chapter that you go into, and the chapter is about 4 pages usually. So every chapter has links to other related chapters. And it's laid out beautifully that, you know, important words are in bold and all that kind of thing. Anyway, so he says this way you can cover each topic in as much or as little depth as you need to. He also says, following on from what I was just saying, you can skim read chapters and paragraphs. So if you really, you know, don't want to just read and you just want to pick up information very quickly, all chapters have been given subheadings for quick skimming, while the paragraph text is occasionally bolded to allow easy scanning. So, for example, let's have a look at the one that we're looking at today. That's going to be Beginners, Curing Your Addiction to the Start of the Piece. if we're looking at a random part here, like stopping to pick weeds, so stopping to pick weeds, nice bold text, the 24-minute commute might sound bad enough by itself, but that assumes that you're playing straight through. The reality is that blah, blah, blah. But basically, it's nice to just sort of read it and your eye gets drawn to the bold, makes it a little bit easier to read. So, that's quite nice. And then number 6 of his ways to use the book is create your own course. Read a different chapter each week for your very own year-long course in practiced mastery, skills you can then apply for the rest of your life. I'm not sure that's really one of the sort of most solid ways of using it. Just basically read a chapter a week. There are actually 61 chapters, so that lasts you a little bit over a year. But anyway, that's how he recommends the different ways that you can use this book. So, he's a very friendly, warm educator. If I read a little bit from the introduction. So he basically defines talent as one common view of talent is as a measure of how easily particular skills come to a student. So if, for example, you have a good ear or find it easy to play from memory or can quickly feel and play back complex rhythms, then you would be talented. Congratulations. But actually, what he then goes on to say, no, there's a much better talent. So some students shine because they have a different talent entirely, one that's not talked about nearly enough. Their talent is for preparing. These are students who have a knack for practicing well. The way they work behind the scenes works, allowing them to turn brand new pieces into performances with a minimum of fuss and maximum effect. And in the process, they leave many of my conventionally more talented students in their wake. And I'm going to completely agree with this because my background, my history as someone who was seen as very talented when I was younger. I was learning, really, really difficult stuff at a very early age. I took my grade 8, I think, when I was aged about 10. It's relatively early. There's people who take it much earlier than that. But, I was really lazy. I was very lazy. I wanted to do the minimum possible effort with the minimum amount of time at the piano. And so actually, my main skill I learned was how to sit down. If I wanted to spend the least amount of time on the piano bench, just on the piano stool, sort of right from an early age, as early as I can remember, I thought to myself, how can I practice to learn as quickly as possible so that I can just go do something else, and so that I can do the least amount of practice and perform with the most amount of confidence? Because for most people, that confidence comes from the more preparation you do, the more confident you feel. But for me, it was like, no, I want to know, how can I practice and how psychologically can I approach it? So a lot of the stuff in the book, I discovered at a very early age because I wanted my time at the piano to be really, really efficient. That doesn't mean I was perfect. Like, I wasn't always good at this, not being addicted to starting from the beginning of the piece. But yeah, this is something that I think I had a talent for. And this is why I learn pieces pretty quickly, and why I have always learned pieces pretty quickly, because I always asked myself that question. So basically, he points out that when you improve your practice skills, it doesn't just mean you're going to sound better. It means that you're going to get more done in less time. And you do this by doing two things. The first one is by getting rid of practice habits that don't work. So you stop wasting your time. And this is something I'm going to talk about in another video, that really the art of becoming a good musician, the art of learning an instrument, is really about the art of building habits. It's not about so much skills, learning knowledge, getting, good technique. Well, it is, but what that entails is all about habits. And I think that most of my students don't appreciate that when they sit down and practice, the most important thing that they want to do is build the right habits. So basically, number one, improving your practice skills. The first one is by getting rid of practice habits that don't work. And the second one that Philip Johnston lists down here is by then replacing them with a brand new set of carefully chosen practice techniques that do work. Now, what I will say is that a lot of the important practice strategies and techniques for me involve the psychology as well, that not a lot of books go into. And you know, there's a lot of stuff that I do that this book doesn't cover. I will cover that in different videos. But yes, you know, this is the basic stuff that all professionals do when they practice effectively. Read all of this book, you're going to get all of these habits. So because these new practice tools are sharper and better suited to the task, they'll get the job done faster. So point number one is that you're going to be able to do less practice to get the same amount of learning done. And that's what appealed to me when I was younger. But then he also makes the point that actually, well, you could just practice less and achieve the same amount. Or what if you carried on practicing the same amount? Then you'd really turbocharge how much you are able to learn. So if you have always been doing around 25 minutes a day, 6 days a week, then you could continue to do that. It's just that with your newfound skills, you might cover as much in 1 week as you used to in 2. Or I think you could really, that seems very conservative. If you're a very effective practicer and you haven't been, you could be doing 10 times more or 20 times more. And then he also makes the point you can supercharge your lessons. The quality of your practice obviously has a huge impact on your playing and performances. Remember, whenever you turn up to a lesson unprepared, it's not just that you failed to meet an obligation, you're actually crippling your teacher for the lesson that follows. And I can't agree with that enough. You're kind of wasting your money or your parents' money if you are not turning up to lessons having done all of the practice and learning that you could have done. You know, there's 2 ways of being a teacher. The first way is to help a student figure out how to practice, figure out how to sort of learn more quickly. And then once you've covered that as a teacher, and once the student starts learning stuff, then you can go into the much deeper stuff of what it is to be an artist, of how to start bringing emotion out, of how to feel it, of how to communicate deeper emotions and structures. But if you can't practice effectively, your teacher can never get to those levels with you. So yeah, some really, really good points here in this introduction. Really important things to know and strategies for everybody. And then he's got this lovely page here, day 0. There's just one more thing, he says. As you're reading this, you will have your own practice track record, and maybe you're not so proud of what's happened so far. Perhaps you're a student who hasn't been doing much practice. Perhaps you haven't been doing any at all, and that's fine. That is fine. A lot of my students have times where they really don't practice at all, and that's normal. And, you know, to be honest, I just want to be absolutely honest and transparent here, because I never want my students to feel guilty and ashamed for not having practiced and worked. It's very human. And what I'm going to admit here is that for most of my life, for most of the time that I ever had a teacher and practiced and turned up for my teacher, if I'm honest, I really barely practiced. Yes, a lot of where I've got to today came about from like raw talent, and I didn't really practice that much. So I would be a complete hypocrite if I had students and got upset that they didn't practice. I want to inspire them to practice. I don't want them to feel like they have to practice. And when you practice out of a sense of it being a chore that you have to beat yourself with a stick, that is not good practicing anyway. The good practicing is when you're inspired. That doesn't mean that you should only practice when you're inspired. It should always be a habit. But part of your habit should be to figure out how to enjoy practicing. That is part of your practice. So anyway, so perhaps you haven't been doing any at all. It doesn't matter. You should say it out loud. It doesn't matter. The practice you've done so far is not what determines your future. It's the practice you do from now on. And then I'm going to say to that as well, it's not even the practice you do from now on, because then if it gets to the next day and you haven't done any, you'll end up feeling guilty. You take it one day at a time. You just take it. It's what I do now. So anyway, so when you turn this page and start the Practiceopedia journey, it's also a fresh start. And every day is a fresh start. You've got to make up your future as you go along, and you can make it completely different from what you've been used to. Know that you've got plenty of people in your corner cheering you on. They're ready when you are. Come on, let's take a look at what's possible. Isn't he lovely? Isn't he a lovely chap? I love the whole feeling tone of this book. It's so friendly and warm, and it wants to give you a hug. So let's get started. This is now where we're going to look at beginners curing your addiction to the start of your piece. But this is not just beginners, and I'm going to talk about this more. So just to remind you, I'm going to go through everything that Philip Johnston said in this chapter, and then I'm going to give you my own thoughts on it, my own experience, and so on. So the start of Haley's new piece is sounding fantastic. In fact, the start of Haley's pieces always sounds fantastic, but the end of her pieces are a different story. No matter which piece she plays, the closer she gets to the last measure or the last bar, the worse her playing becomes until everything collapses in a tangle on the last page. What's going on? Why do her pieces sound great at the start, get sick in the middle, and die at the end? He's a really engaging writer. Like, I love this opening bit on the next page. There's a song in The Sound of Music that says something about the beginning being a very good place to start. That might be true if you're reading a novel or competing in the 100 meters final at the Olympics, but it's not always great advice when you're practicing. For a lot of students, though, the beginning of their piece isn't just a very good place to start. It's the only place to start. No matter what the task in front of them, they always handle it in exactly the same way. Task: to memorize the development section of the new sonata. Solution: play from the start of the piece. The start, that's nowhere near the development section. But that's how the beginner's trap works. No matter where your target actually is, you start from the first square on the board. So here's the same student handling a completely different task. Task: to work on the tricky cross rhythms in measures 327 to 351. Solution: play from the first measure. And measure is basically American or Australian, I'm guessing, speak for bar. And if the student suffers from this disease badly enough, if the start of their piece is the only section they can start from, then even the following insanity is possible. Task: to work out an effective fingering for the final 6 measures of my theme and 41 variations. Solution: give me a second, I just need to play from the start. And so I'm sure every teacher is like, Of course, the result of building bias like this into your practice is that the opening of your piece just keeps getting better and better, while the end sounds as though it's hardly been practiced at all, which is largely because it's hardly been practiced at all. What's really interesting here, and what all beginners should understand, this isn't just beginners, is why that's the case, though. So anyway, the next little section, I love what he calls this. He calls this unnecessary commuting. So basically, it's not factoring in the reality that regions most distant from the start can take serious practice time just to get to. To take an extreme example, let's imagine you had a piece that's 25 minutes long and your task was to tidy up the ending. If you're starting from the beginning, it'll take you 24 minutes of playing just to get to your target, which in a half-hour practice session leaves 6 minutes to actually work on the problem. So the first price you pay is extra practice to cover the commuting you need to do each day from the start of your piece all the way to the passage you really needed to fix. But this wasted travel time is only part of the problem. Stopping to pick weeds. I love that. Yeah, the 24-minute commute might sound bad enough by itself, but that assumes that you're just playing straight through. The reality is that if you always start from the beginning, you'll notice things that need work while you're traveling. And so, like a hiker with a pebble in their shoe, you'll stop. After all, you've noticed a problem and you'll want to fix it. Hard to argue with that. But since you've stopped, none of the problems that come after the one you're working on will be visible to you yet. They'll only be covered once your journey resumes and if there's time. Worse still, for hardcore beginners, the journey might not resume. Having dealt with the problem they spotted, they dust their hands off, roll up their sleeves, and start again from the beginning. And I mean, I'm sure I still do that a little bit. Even now, we all get pulled into that a little bit. And I'd say that the less experience that you have, as a learner. You know, the less years you've been playing, the more you absolutely will be doing this. So all of this creates an imbalance. Problems near the beginning are guaranteed to get noticed because the journey to them is short. Problems near the end, though, are waiting in line, and it's a line that items from the beginning can push in whenever they feel like it. So yeah. And if things go wrong on concert day, this is so important because I see this all the time, even with really advanced musicians. You know, a lot of the meetups that I go to for amateur musicians where people are way beyond grade 8, you know, like diploma level, advanced, they make a mistake. And a lot of the time, they have to go right back to the beginning and play from the beginning. And he talks about this here. If things go wrong on concert day, there's only one thing you'll know how to do. You won't be able to just pick up from there wherever you got lost because that's something you've never done. And here he refers to another chapter that helps you with that. Instead, beginners handle that problem the same way they handle every problem in their practice sessions. They start again from the beginning. And then the next little sentence, he even puts in a special section on its own, which is quite funny. The groans from the audience will be almost loud enough to cover the sound of your teacher sobbing. Now, in reality, most people are quite tolerant of this, but it's unnecessary. You know, if you practice in different ways, you don't have to do this, but it's such a common problem. So creating new home bases. If you're a beginner, then it's not all bad news. And every time he says beginner here, he's basically meaning, he's putting beginner a lot of the time in quotes or in bold, and it means someone who keeps starting from the beginner. So, you know, in my opinion, you don't actually have to be a beginner to have this bad habit. So with the attention it's received, the beginning of your piece will be in great shape. You can then use similar bias in your practice to ensure the rest of the piece is in great shape too. Remember, you didn't end up being that good at the beginning because the beginning was easy or because you liked it more. It happened simply because that was always the place you started from. Now here, I'm going to disagree a little bit. When it comes to intermediate to advanced piano pieces, and a lot of the time, the more advanced the piano piece is, the more this is going to happen, I would argue that the piece tends to get harder and harder until the end. And I'll talk a bit more about this once I've gone through the rest of this chapter. But generally, from about grade 5 onwards, maybe even before then, generally, in my experience, piano music just starts to get more and more difficult the more you get towards the end of the piece. So he says, this is exactly how you can turn the beginner's trap, always starting from the same place at the beginning, into a powerful practice weapon. The idea is to continue to work with a home, but to ensure that the home is located near wherever most of your assigned tasks are. So if most of your jobs this week are in the development section of your piece, development section being like in sonata form, it's the bit in the middle where you take the melodies that were at the beginning and you start to do more interesting things with them. So so are in the development section of your piece, then your home for the week should be the start of the development section. And then he says, it's like the time spent establishing a base camp for a hiking expedition, which I think is a really nice analogy. You know, if you're climbing Mount Everest, you don't start from sea level. You don't start from the sea. You get to a base camp and then you start from there. You're now welcome to start from there. Every time you practice, if you wish, it's acting as your new beginning. It just happens to be much better located than the old one. Because your practice tasks will change, you need to review the location of your home every few days to make sure that it's still near the work you need to do. So in our example above, if you've taken care of most issues in the development section already, then it's time to pitch your tent near a different problem. And then he goes on to sort of call this nomadic practice, because nomads are people who don't have a permanent fixed home. Being smart about the location of your home for the week is a great start to correcting some of the imbalances that beginner practice causes. But in the end, you want your practice to evolve so that there's no home at all. That instead, you're able to zoom in and start directly from whatever the problem you're trying to fix. And I'd say that most of the time when I'm practicing, most of the time, this is what I do. And I'm going to explain a little bit more, some more details that it's important to get across that he doesn't give in this chapter. But that is pretty much true of most of the practice that I do. There are also times when I think it's important and useful to be able to practice from the beginning, but I will get to this later. So you'll be stunned by the amount of practice time you can save when you work in this commute-free way, and by how much more even the quality of your piece will be. This is so true. And then I'm not quite sure what the difference is here, but he has another heading here called Using Positive Discrimination. If your piece has already been affected by the beginner's practice trap, then you don't need to panic. It's just time to even the score a little. Starting immediately, you would work exclusively on the last page of the piece. I don't really see the difference between this and just using the last page as a new base camp. But anyway, it is a useful thing to do, and I'm going to get to more on this later. So the bias in favor of the end would continue until it's the same standard as the beginning. Given that the beginning has had a tremendous head start, this might take a while. And then, when everything is square once more, you'll focus on the second last page of the piece, again, until it's caught up. Because it's that much closer to the beginning, though, you'll probably have had a little more attention than the very end originally had, and so shouldn't need to pedal as hard for as long to catch up. It's not pedaling on the piano, it's like pedaling on a bicycle. Because it took me a moment to go, pedal? What? Huh? Anyway, ditto for the page before that. So this process gets easier and easier as you gradually get closer to the start. And, I'm going to come to this later, but I think that often when starting a new piece of music, it can be very, very useful to actually go straight to the last page, start learning the last page, and then work backwards from that as an antidote to this addiction of starting from the beginning, to not even look at the first page. There are some caveats to that. I'm going to cover this in a minute. So that's the end of this chapter. And there's some really profound stuff in there. And, this is something that I do regularly talk about with all of my students. And every teacher ever says, oh my God, stop just starting from the beginning of your piece. But I like the way that he communicates. I like the way he lays everything out. There's something just very engaging about the way he structures that and lays it out. But, you need to be a little bit careful going a little bit too far with this technique, because I've actually gone too far in quite a few times and then had a nightmare with the very beginning of the piece. I don't know, like for example, I remember I cringed remembering this. So for example, I don't know how many of you know the Chopin Etude, Winter Wind Etude, Opus 25, number 11, and it starts like this. And then, because I'm totally out of practice with this piece, here is how the next bit goes, which is already on a YouTube video that I played. This is me playing it with the camera from above. It then goes into this. And so basically, I remember a performance, the first performance that I gave of this, I'd absolutely, I can't play it now, but I'd absolutely practiced it and practiced the most difficult bars and nailed the really tricky scale at the end. And then I sat down to play and was, hang on, what's the first note? I couldn't remember the first note. And then once I got the first note, I was like, what's the rest of it do? I couldn't remember the beginning, because why would I practice the beginning? It's so easy. But then I completely blanked on it. I completely forgot it. So you've got to be careful not to go a little bit too far with this, And I remember there was another time that illustrates, this is the other way around. When I learned the Chopin Ballad number 1, and I was at university. And so for people who don't know this, it's the one that starts like... very, very popular piece of piano music. It's like every advanced pianist wants to learn this at some point or another. I haven't played this in forever. Something like this. You know, everyone loves this piece. It's got some quite tricky bits in it. Yeah, it's still kind of in my muscle memory, bits of it. But then, you know, it gradually starts getting harder and harder and harder. And when I was at uni, I basically decided I was going to play this for one of my end of year recital exams. And as a student, I always cut things very near to the wire because I was a lazy student, very disorganized. And so I had not a lot of time to learn it, like, you know, just a few weeks. And then I think it was like the week before the exam, and I got to the final 3 pages. And, you know, I can't play this now. It's not in my muscle memory. Maybe if I hadn't learnt it in under a week when I was at university, this would still be in my muscle memory. But it's ludicrously, suddenly way more difficult than anything that came before it. And I got to it, like, with a week to go to the exam, was like, and then went to my teacher, and my teacher was like, I told you to learn the last 3 pages first. I told you to learn them first. And, you know, I did learn it. I think I did it decently, but that was just such unnecessary stress because, you know, it wasn't exactly that every single time I practiced it, I just started from the beginning. But what I did, and this is subtly different, this is a subtly different thing to what Philip Johnston was talking about in his chapter. And I think this applies to everyone, not just beginners. The subtly different thing is when you learn a piece of music from the beginning, you start on the first bar, and then each time you practice it, you might not necessarily go straight to the very first bar. You might go to the bar where you got to, but then you end up playing that section a lot, and you gradually sort of, you keep expanding forwards, you keep pushing forwards. So it's like, you know, you might start your practice session not at the very beginning, but a few bars in. But then once you've got that, what do? You go back to the beginning, you integrate it, you go from the beginning. And I think that almost everyone who is not at professional pianist level, that is how they will learn a piece. And what I do now, like religiously, is when I look at a new piece of music and I open it up, you are allowed to read through it a couple of times. You're allowed to play from beginning to end, to sight read it, to get an idea of it from beginning to end a couple of times. Work out fingerings, all that kind of stuff. But once you've done that and you're properly starting work on your piece properly, what I do religiously, almost always, and again, there's a caveat to that, which I'll tell you in a minute, but almost always, I go straight to the most difficult passages, the ones I know are going to take me the most amount of time and energy to learn. I go straight to the most difficult things. Why? The most difficult things are going to take you the most amount of time to learn. So if you're going to play anything over and over and over again, it should be the most difficult things. Generally, the beginning of a piece is not the most difficult thing. So you don't want that to be the first thing that you work on. Now, don't do what I did either with Winter Wind and really, really don't look at the easy bits at the beginning enough, because that becomes a problem in itself. You've got to make sure everything is watertight. But it is so useful to go through it and really work out this honestly is the bit that's going to need the most work, and I'm going to start with that. But first of all, I want to just point out about the way that neuroscience shows that we learn motor skills. And motor skills are basically skills we learn with our body because it's in the motor cortex. The motor cortex in the brain is the part of the brain that controls the body, learns complicated skills like playing the piano. Now, when we're learning complicated, difficult motor skills, the way that the brain learns these is in chains. So if I'm playing, if I'm learning to go, let's say I'm learning a scale. What the brain is not doing, the brain is not basically just encoding this, and then encoding this, and then encoding this, and then encoding that. What it does is it builds a whole chain of it all together. So if you wanted to go from here, most people will not be able to do that unless they're relatively advanced. And you know, this is another phenomenon. I'm always shocked, because I guess this is something I need to be a little bit more on the ball with when it comes to my students. And I've noticed it recently that if I say to a student, go from bar 2. So for example, here's the Chopin ballad, because I've just got the page open here. Here's bar 1, bar 2, whoops, bar 3. Now if I say to most students, start at bar 2, most of my students just will go, and not be able to do that. If I say, yeah, go from there, so I can read it goes from here into there. Most students will not be able to do that. Even though they've learnt it, they might happily be able to you know, put both bars together. It won't be any issue at all. They might feel completely comfortable. But if they have to go from here, because you're breaking the chain, that's not the way that the human brain, the motor cortex works. It works by chaining everything. So most students go from here, they've got to either just go from the beginning and then go, yes, that's how I get into that. Or if they cheat, have their hand there, but I can see them go. So they've like mimed, they're like almost playing the rest of it to get that chain going in their mind. And the problem with this, like Philip Johnston was pointing out, that means if you're only going from the beginning, the entire piece can only be played in that unbroken chain from the beginning. Neuroscience kind of backs up this is not a good thing to do. So a thing you might want to do is go from the second bar, you know, and then go from the third bar. Go from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bar. Go from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th bar. And so on and so on. And, you know, this is something that teachers are always getting their students to do with good reason. And students are generally pretty bad at this because students don't practice just being able to go from any point on the page. When you practice this way, it makes your playing so much more solid, so much more dependable, for so many reasons. If you make a mistake, you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. It's basically, when you just keep going back to the beginning, you are only building muscle memory. Muscle memory is fine, but you don't just want it to be this autopilot, mindless, just unbroken chain from the beginning. So yes, completely agree that working from the end backwards is a much more powerful way to learn your piece, because it breaks this kind of, if you learn it from the beginning forwards, there's always going to be some element of that very strong chain. But when you learn from the end backwards, you get lots of individual chains, which is so much more healthy. And by the time you've finished it, you then build that chain that goes all the way through, and you know, backwards, forwards. It's so much more robust. It's also so much easier to memorize that way around. But what you might want to do is, rather than going by page, look at sections. Like, what's an obvious section of the music, and go from the beginning of that section just before the end. Then find another section and go from the beginning of that section. So that if you make a mistake and you have a memory lapse or something goes wrong, you just go from the beginning of that section. These are pretty useful habits. So, you know, like I said before, there are times when I lean into starting from the beginning. So sometimes I really can't be bothered to go from the most difficult part of a piece. There are times where maybe my confidence is not quite so amazing, and everyone's confidence, I don't care who you are, you can be the most incredible pianist on the planet. But if you had a bad day and a bad review, your confidence might take a bit of a hit. Or maybe you're learning a piece and it just seems a bit trickier than usual. We all have our bad days and our bad months and our bad years. And there are times when I'll be learning something and be like, oh, this is so difficult, this is so challenging, I just don't quite have that motivation. And I'll start from the beginning, because if I'm not careful, it then just starts to become a chore. It starts to become oh, I have to be good enough. I've got to, tackle this like a mountain, and it feels like a mountain. So I'll just go from the beginning, and I'm gonna just enjoy it and start to just feel it and love it, and just, enjoy the easier bits and let myself ease into it. It's like getting to know a friend. Going straight into the most difficult parts of a piece, you're tackling the technique, but going from the beginning is like you're forming a relationship with the music. That can be very, very useful. You don't just want to open your piece and just be like a robot going for, learning technically all the notes. You want to make sure it's always a relationship and that you're enjoying it. And there will be times where going straight to the most difficult stuff is just not going to do that. So, yeah, you have to figure out what that balance is. Yeah, and, again, sometimes we need to go from the beginning to get that understanding of who the piece of music is, of what landscape it's painting, of what it's conveying, so that when we get to more difficult sections, it fits in, it kind of, we understand where the journey that it's taken to at that point. So, there's everything that I teach, there's always exceptions to the strategies and to rules, and there's always exceptions. So sometimes a piece of music is not going to sound great if you haven't gone from the beginning. One of the things that's just come into my mind, I remember I had a student who started learning a fugue from the end backwards, because I never said to them, no, you like a fugue. You want to understand what the subject is, what the counter subject, all that kind of stuff. It's actually, you don't really want to learn a fugue from the end backwards. You want to logically get a feeling for all the different voices and how they develop. So there's always going to be exceptions, and you have to it comes with experience, but you have to trust your own judgment, and also your own. Can you be honest with yourself? Are you going from the beginning because it is objectively, genuinely the best strategic thing to do? Or are you doing it because it's just the laziest thing to do, because you just don't really feel like tackling the difficult things? It is a balance. And then, also there's another point to this, which is going straight to the most difficult sections is not just because logically you're going to end up having to need to spend more time doing it, but there's a really, really important practice strategy, which is you have to lean in as much as you can to the things that you can't do, to the things that are challenging, to your weakest things. If you're always practicing, indulging the things that you are best at, that sound the best, that make you feel good about yourself, which is most people, if they're honest, if that's what you're leaning into and you're kind of leaning away from the things that are challenging, that you're not good at. So many of my students are like this. In many ways, the most talented students are scared of the things that are most difficult, because it can threaten their sense of, I'm pretty good at this. So in many ways, the more natural talent the students have, the more they can shy away from the things that really challenge them, because it challenges the ego. But hopefully, logically, objectively, it makes sense that if you spend more time leaning into the things that you find most difficult, that are your weaknesses, you're going to improve as a pianist, as a musician, so much faster than when you spend most of your time doing the things that you're already good at. That should make sense, right? But there are psychological things there that get in your way. And, I think that one of the things that maybe most people don't think enough about, because it's one thing to say, yeah, do all the difficult things. Of course, that's really obvious. But why? Why do most people not lean into and do those things? So, related to the feeling of the ego feeling under threat, of like, but I'm a good pianist, and if I start doing that, I feel like I'm not a good pianist. As a lot of you know, I'm really interested in Buddhism and things like Zen Buddhism, Zen meditation. There's a concept in Zen Buddhism called beginner's mind. And off the top of my head, the story that best illustrates this is there's a novice who really wants to study with this expert monk, and so they've been trying for years to be a disciple of this monk, and eventually the monk lets them in and gives them an audience, so you want to study with me. And this novice person who wants to study is like, yes, I've studied this and I've been studying that, and I want to do this, and I've looked at this book and I've studied that. And while the student is talking, the experienced monk has been pouring a cup of tea from a teapot, and he keeps pouring and keeps pouring until it gets to the top, and keeps pouring and keeps pouring and keeps pouring until there's tea everywhere, the floor, the table. And this novice student is like, what are you doing? You're pouring and pouring. Well, what are you doing? It's gone everywhere. The experienced monk says, you, like this teacup, are already full. How can I impart my wisdom to you, my experience, how can you learn anything if you do not empty your mind first? So having a beginner's mind is like being an empty cup. And so this is something that, I never really thought consciously about this. But when I started getting into Buddhism more in recent years, I realized that all my life, this is subconsciously what I've been doing when I'm learning the piano, when I'm practicing a piece. Whatever I'm learning, whatever piece of music it is, that I do way better if I let go of the need to be good at it, to prove that I can do it, because that just results in much worse playing. If I can approach anything that's difficult and just be very, very patient, and it's okay if I can't play it, and I'm just an empty vessel, and I just keep exploring all the different ways in which I can move, it makes it so much easier to learn something that's difficult. If I'm learning something that's new and going, oh my God, I'm not learning this fast enough. Oh God, I'm just not good enough. And I'm sure everyone relates to this feeling. And it's one of the main reasons why people allow their impatience to take them over when they're learning a new piece of music. And impatience is tension, and people get very tense and in a very narrow focus and really super striving and putting all the wrong kind of effort in and not feeling everything that's going on in their body. All this impatience and tension comes from a lack of ability to just feel like we're a beginner, no matter where we are. And, like I've been working on some crazy difficult pieces. I've been working on, the Chopin etudes at the moment that have been, that all my life, I've never quite been able to play, like Opus 10 number 2, those things. And I've been for weeks and weeks and weeks, just like, very slowly, very patiently. It feels like I'm a complete beginner, and there are times when now after a few weeks, and I can play it, but it needs more time. It needs more time of me just to be complete, Zen beginner's mind, because the opposite is tension, and it's so much harder. And though there's a reason why those pieces, I've not been able to learn them for most of my life, because I haven't quite tapped into that beginner's mind that I feel that now I've really been able to tap into, to be very patient. And now, oh my God, I can play it. It's, really made a difference. The opposite of beginner's mind is I need to feel competent and know that I can play this piece of music. So I'm going to go straight to the beginning because it makes me feel that I can do this thing, not go slowly. This is how most people practice. It's kind of the opposite of beginner's mind. So, yeah, anyway, I hope that you enjoyed that episode. Again, I hope that this longer format episode suits what I'm doing here. If you think that, if you're still with me to the end, and thank you for watching the whole thing, if you think that this could have benefited from me really tightening it up and explaining everything in 5 minutes, I can do that in future videos. Or if you think that this works, you know, keeping this as a longer format video, please let me know in the comments. I'm curious to know what you guys think. So, you know, as always, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Click on the bell icon if you want to know when more videos like this are coming out. I still have some space for online students. There will be a link in the description below if you want to get in touch. Yeah, take care. Go do some practicing or go watch more of my videos and take care. Goodbye.